Unified School District is to provide excellent public education that empowers all to achieve their fullest potential as productive citizens. AUSD is committed to creating comprehensive learning opportunities in a safe, supportive, and collaborative environment, addressing the individual needs of each student.
Thank you. The board took no action in closed session. Next item is approval of the agenda. Does anyone have any changes or amendments to the agenda? Charlie?
So I have no changes or amendments, and I'm going to move that we approve the agenda. I just wanted to note that I will actually need to leave at the designated closing time of 9 p.m. so I can take my wife to the train station tonight.
Okay. Let's see if we can get finished around that time. So we have a motion to approve the agenda?
I second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Thank you. We have a recognition of, for the week of the school administrator.
Thank you, President-elect trustees and student board members. It is always my pleasure to, so I kind of lost a vocabulary word there. I was thinking of the word honor and celebrate, but I think sometimes those words don't always convey the meaning that I have for the leadership in our district. To be a leader in our district administrator means that you're taking on the task and the commitment to always put students first and to provide every opportunity for students to be successful. So the Week of the School Administrator is an opportunity to celebrate our leaders, and I'd like to turn this over to our Director of Human Resources, Cheryl Cotton.
Thank you. I just want to acknowledge that actually the celebration of an acknowledgement of our school administrators, actually it's Ed Code, and I don't know if anyone was aware of that. Ed Code section 44015.1. The first full week of October is the week that we celebrate and we acknowledge the hard work that our school administrators do. And I have had a chance since the last few months to get to know all of our administrators, and I am impressed with the level of professionalism and just the hard work that they put in for the students and the staff and the families in the community. And I just want to applaud them. I see Deb Brill and David Halpert here. I just want to say, and also Diane and just all of the administrators that are in this room, and those who are watching and those who work diligently every day for our students. I just want to say thank you. I have a resolution here. I don't know if anyone is interested in reading it.
Whereas the title school administrator is a broad term used to define many education leadership posts. Superintendents, principals, assistant principals, school business officials, classified leaders, and all school district directors are considered administrators. And whereas providing quality leadership and service for student success is paramount for the profession. And whereas public schools operate with lean management systems. Across the nation, public schools employ fewer managers and supervisors than most public and private sector industries. And whereas the future of California's public education system depends upon the quality of its leadership, now therefore be it resolved that the Governing Board of Trustees of the Albany Unified School District proclaims October 8th to 12th, 2018 to be Week of the School Administrator. Be it further resolved that the Governing Board of Trustees of the Albany Unified School District encourages all members of our community to join with it in personally expressing appreciation to our administrators for their leadership, dedication, and devotion to their work. So before we actually vote on this, I just want to add that in my 10 years on the board, I've spent a lot of time working with administrators. A good deal of that time I've been either vice president or president. I've spent a lot of time at the district office. I've visited all the schools in the district, watched what goes on in the schools, chatted with the principals, and we have an awesome group of administrators in this district. They work very hard, very long hours, and I've never heard, well, they don't complain to me. They might complain to someone. They don't complain to me, but when I do talk to them, their concern is always what's best for the students. I've never heard them talk about, you know, having a nicer desk or a bigger office or better buildings. It's always what's best for the students. So I just want to express my personal appreciation. So I'll come back up there and we can have a vote.
Paul, while you're coming back up, I just want to add my personal appreciation to whether or not this is required by Ed Code. I'm happy that we're doing it, and it really does express our thanks, my thanks personally, and I think the thanks of the whole board.
Thanks, Charlie. Anyone else want to comment before we vote? We have a motion.
I motion we pass this resolution.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Thank you.
Okay.
Is this echo required?
Yeah, right.
Val?
Squeeze in. Well, the may need us.
Val, you need to be in the picture.
That's funny.
Somebody else take the picture.
Oh, it's gonna take it right.
Do we need to squeeze in? Can you get it all? Can you get us all in?
Thank you.
Okay, moving on. We have the consent calendar. Does anyone want to comment on, question, or pull any items in the consent calendar? Any comments from the public on the consent calendar? Okay, if not, we need a motion to approve the consent calendar.
I move we approve the consent calendar.
Second?
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Board and Superintendent Reports.
Thank you, President Black. I have two items. One is the Albany High School Choir under the direction of Mary Stocker performed at the Alameda County Office of Education Teacher of the Year Awards. They did an amazing job. I was able to videotape the entire, their section and it's on the district's website, so if anybody wants to listen to it. The theme for the county was Together We Rise, and the choir sang, it was a quartet, and they sang Bridge Over Troubled Water, and it was really a beautiful presentation, a performance. There was it was just, the round of applause was overwhelming. Second item I want to report is we had our second Budget Advisory Committee meeting last week. The committee reviewed a lot more information and data, and they will continue at our next meeting to start working on priorities. And so our next meeting of the Budget Advisory Committee meeting is October 18th at 5:30 p.m. And per the Brown Act, this will be agendized and posted, and is also on our website. All information that the Budget Advisory Committee reviews, as well as the minutes, once they are approved by the Budget Advisory Committee, are available on the website for public viewing. Thank you.
Thanks. Any board members? Jacob.
Yeah, I just wanted to give a big shout out to all the volunteers who helped out at Cornell Elementary for the Silly Olympics. My wife is involved, and they were even, I'm sure they were working weeks and weeks ahead of time, but on Saturday we stopped by and it was really cool to see the kids painting the posters and everybody getting everything together. And also wanted to give a shout out to Trader Joe's at El Cerrito Plaza. They gave us a very generous donation for the Silly Olympics, which all that money goes back to the school and the kids. So I want to thank everybody who was involved in making the Silly Olympics a successful and fun event.
Great, thanks. Ross.
So I attended a session at the Albany Library that was convened by the head of the Alameda County Library System as a sort of a feedback, listening, communication session talking about the city, the schools, and the library system and how we might work better together or expand services in the future. There's an online survey. I put some of these in the back of the room if you all would like to participate as well. But I talked about my personal interest in seeing early childhood education get addressed. Certainly the library is a huge resource for that. And a number of folks spoke about adult education programs, including rather bitterly about the cuts that the district had made to adult programs in the past. But I think it was a very great discussion. I also mentioned the future makerspace, and I think the libraries are quite interested by that idea, that it might be available as a resource on beyond the schools or as a collaborative resource working with the libraries. So I would absolutely encourage people to take the survey. It's on the cards in the back. It should be on the Albany Library site as well.
Thanks. Anyone else? Kim.
I wanted to mention the Albany Community Triathlon. That is an event put on annually. It was on Sunday, October 7th. The triathlon is put on by a subcommittee of the Albany Athletic Boosters, and we had over 250 racers. The event is run on volunteer power solely. There are no paid organizers, and we had 105 volunteers the day of the event. That was about 60% students, mostly from the high school, a few from the middle school, and about 40% parents of athletes. And that profit from the race will go back to their teams. So over 16 teams will be supported from the event.
Great. Thanks. Anyone else? Okay, good. This brings us to persons to address the board on matters not on the agenda. I ask that you keep your comments to 3 minutes or less.
Students.
Oh, student board member. Oh, we don't want to skip that, do we? Okay, student board member report.
At Ocean View, the Ocean View PTA is teaming up with the clothing brand Tea Collection for a fundraiser. Students will be getting some exercise on their way to class for International Walk and Roll to School Day tomorrow, October 10th, and that event will also be celebrated by all the other schools. At Cornell, students will be celebrating National Digital Citizenship Week from October 15th to the 19th, and Alameda County Food Bank bins have arrived in the main hallway. At Marin, today, October 9th, students posed for Picture Day. On October 5th, Morales, a Caldecott Award winner, spoke about her book featuring her family's immigration to San Francisco from Mexico. On October 6th, Marin students drew with chalk at the annual Chalk It Up event. At Albany Middle School, clubs such as GSA, Earth Team, and Technology Club meet to discuss the various interests of Albany Middle School students, and school site council elections are taking place now until tomorrow, October 10th. At Albany High School, college application and financial aid information nights will be taking place in the following weeks to help seniors with their future plans. And Albany High School students showed up and spoke at a rally hosted by leaders of Speak and Stand on October 3rd to protest misogyny and the nomination of Kavanaugh as our Supreme Court Justice. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, any questions or comments for our students? No? Okay, sorry, I want to skip over that. It's an important report. Okay, now we come to persons to address the board on matters not on the agenda. Please restrict your comments to 3 minutes or less, and remember that the board cannot respond because the matter is not on the agenda.
All right. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Jamie Haynes. I'm a teacher at Albany. Been there for 10 years, and I've taught for over 20 years. I'm here out of concern as a parent and a teacher that our community really needs to do a whole lot more work on trauma, being aware of trauma, what induces trauma, how we conduct ourselves in light of trauma. So I could say a whole lot. There's some things I'd like to say in closed session if I was given the opportunity in the near future of a sensitive nature. And I'm going to narrow it down to really why I'm here. In light of the Kavanaugh hearings and everything that had been going on for the last 30 days, I think it's pretty common knowledge that survivors and victims of abuse and of trauma, we're kind of on high alert at all times. It's constant reminders all the time. And, you know, that's kind of common sense. And I was really glad and excited to go up to the speeches last week at the high school to acknowledge the free speech, the acknowledgement that people are taking, are demanding equal rights and justice and all those good things. My students that are here, they're really proud of them. It was amazing. You know, you couldn't be there and not be moved. In light of the trauma this community suffered with the Instagram event a few years ago, I would expect that we'd be on a higher level of awareness of what causes trauma and what we do. And this is not to throw anyone under the bus, metaphorically, certainly not the students that put this on. My concerns are that, is there an awareness that psychologists know, and I now know, after speaking to 2 of them, that the disclosures that were given in public are harmful to survivors and victims. They're traumatic. And it was acknowledged by the thoughtful speakers that said, look, there will be triggers, here's some ways out. And what people don't acknowledge is that survivors and victims are frozen often in these times. They can't leave. Peer pressure not included in that. It was a huge oversight. And I went up there wanting to feel proud and happy, and I came back just feeling like something had gone wrong, really wrong. What would we have done if a student had hurt themselves that day? Who would be accountable? I know that the students would feel accountable, and they shouldn't. We know better. So let's be clear. When you read disclosures, raw like that, to 13-year-old kids, middle school kids were there too, it is trauma causing. It is really harmful to a survivor and a victim. Do we acknowledge that here? I don't know. I suggest anytime we're going to do anything that's really sensitive and possibly traumatic causing, we consult our own school psychologists before we do an activity. Have we not learned from the last event? That's for all teachers and all staff to be more mindful. So that's what I will leave you with, that I think we need to take a step back. We need to look at what we did and what didn't happen and be glad it didn't happen. But, you know, what are we going to do moving forward? And as far as the other issues go, I would request a closed session at the earliest convenience when it's, you know, when we can do that. Thank you.
Okay, I'm not sure that we can legally bring you into closed session, but we can figure out a way for you to get your message confidentially to us. You can email me directly or the superintendent, and we'll work that out. Thank you. Ross?
So I haven't spoken on matters not on the agenda before, but I do so now, not as a board member, but as a board candidate and as a parent of a student at AUSD. Last Wednesday, one of the teachers at Albany High distributed campaign materials to a school club during lunch on premises. The faculty member was an ATA official, and among other things said was that there was going to be a canvassing session for the ATA endorsed candidates, and she provided information to the students about that. This is in direct violation of administrative regulations of this district. AR 411925, personnel, says political activities of employees, district employees shall not post or distribute political campaign materials on district property. There are some others that may also apply. Should not use students to write, distribute, or address or distribute political campaign materials. You know, it may not be a slam dunk that those students were going to then go to the canvassing session and start distributing the same flyers, but I put that out there as a caution. And last was use district time to urge the passage or defeat of any ballot measure or candidate. urge the passage or defeat. So I guess advocating for candidates would count. So I think that's a pretty flat-out violation of administrative regulations by someone I think ought to know better. I went and did the research. I'm talking about Miriam Walden, who's the treasurer of the ATA. Miriam was on this school board when that last administrative regulation was last revised. So if in future I violate a board policy or administrative regulation I've helped pass, I will feel absolutely on the hook. So what I would like to request, and Val, I guess the superintendent, the request would be to you to make this request of the teacher involved. I'd like to request a written acknowledgement of the incident, a recognition that it was an incorrect action, that mistakes were made, and an apology for it in light of this being a violation of AUSD administrative regulations. Thank you.
I also am here as a community member and not as a board member. I wanted to address what you had said, Mr. Haynes. I know you as Mr. Haynes, so. About the rally that was hosted at AHS this past week. The rally was not school-sponsored, and it was led by me as well as other leaders of Speak and Stand, which are two major activist groups at Albany High. We would have done the rally with or without the school's permission, but we ended up trying to let them know about what was happening. We didn't know that there was going to be an open mic where survivors of sexual assault could come up and talk about their stories, but when it did come up, we weren't going to shut them down because there is so much silencing of sexual assault victims. We did put a trigger warning at the beginning, and then I also do acknowledge that it was there is definitely a freeze that happens in victims of sexual assault, and there's notwithstanding peer pressure, like you had said. My 7th grade sister was at the rally. I knew that she, as well as many other students at AMS and also at AHS, were feeling very triggered and disturbed by what was said, and I think that there isn't necessarily a good way that it could have been handled by the leaders of Speak and Stand, because we could have either shut down these people who were wanting to come forward about their experiences, or we could have let that happen and then had some people in the crowd be triggered about their own experiences. But I did want to say that this was on the leaders of Speak, on the leaders of Stand, and it wasn't a school-sponsored event. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay.
Good evening. I want to be able to comment on what was just raised by board member Ross Stapleton. And I was in a meeting last week where you were very prolific in your role in being able to say that you were not willing, you are not going to apologize for your white privilege. You said that about 3 times. And I had a problem with that. No one else in the room got up and outraged. Those were your words. And that it was hard for being a white man in these days, and that you were not going to apologize for it. No one was asking you for an apology. As far as the actions of this teacher, it's an election. People are going to say a bunch of things that folks don't agree with. You have 2 students on this board who have heard things that they don't necessarily like, but they understand the responsibilities on their shoulders to speak up and make aware their classmates at the high school level. There's a lot of politicians who I don't agree with what the things they say, but at the end of the day, for you to call out one teacher and still sit here, I've sat here for the last 1.5 years in that corner, one of those 4 seats, but I'm always here. And the only reason I'm here is because I expect transparency. When the scores for children of color within Albany get better, and there isn't such a huge gap, then you can brag about your privilege, you can brag about your whiteness as much as you want. Say it to the 4 winds. But at the ballot boxes, each of our families has a responsibility to make sure that there's someone sitting at this table sitting on this board and are really taking all of Albany into consideration. But for you to attack someone that's not even in the room, being able to have the decency to have that person in front of you and look at them in the eye, you could have addressed this differently. And yes, sir, you are a candidate, but on your candidacy, you also have a responsibility to make sure that what's coming out of your mouth is not only understanding of who and what work you've done for on behalf of all of our families. But I have sat in this room and you, along with Mr. Black, have shut me down on a number of issues that are important to our families. So you can brag about as much as you want and you can complain, but you should also check yourself and what's coming out of your mouth that our children and other families are hearing here in Albany. When the scores and the gaps are not that wide, brag about your candidacy and why people should vote for you. But right now, you should be careful that you are a candidate. And this is the body that if you have a problem with anyone, knock on as many doors as you can so you can gather as many ballots and as many votes for yourself. But this, sir, this is your place to be able to do your job. And your job and the work you do will speak volumes for you, for all the families to be able to say, this guy deserves my vote again.
Can I respond? I think I've been directly called out. Well,
you have, but you are now on the dais and you can't respond.
All right.
You can respond offline.
Let's move on.
Okay, anyone else want to speak on items not on the agenda? Okay, that brings us to staff reports.
Thank you, President Black, trustees. This item is our monthly promoting safe, supportive, and collaborative environments for all students and staff. I'm going to turn this over to Carrie Neerheim, our Director of Student Services. Ms. Neerheim.
Good evening, President Black, our school board, Superintendent Williams. I am here to give an update on the Albany Coming Together recommendations. Those are in front of you, and for those of you in the audience, we do have copies on the back table for you. A tremendous amount of work has gone into this document. When I joined AUSD, I was able to become a part of the Albany Coming Together Advisory Committee, proudly, I might add. And the work that was done prior to me joining Albany was 100 recommendations were created for our district. Those 100 were later refined into 25. And the 25 that they were condensed down into, some were married together, some were put together, are in front of you now. And because it is 25, and it is an 18-page document, I'm going to just highlight a few. What I would like to encourage those in the audience and our board to do is please take your time to be able to look over it since you're getting it this evening. This is a working, living document that we will be coming back to. We met on September 26th, and we will be meeting quarterly. And I will be reporting to the board quarterly as well. So I'd like to draw your attention to the first recommendation. I'm going to be covering 1, 2, 4, 5, 8, 13, and then finishing with 9. So I'll go through it. I know that sounds a little strange, but I want to end with 9. So starting with number 1, the recommendation was to hire a full-time director of diversity, inclusion, and equity. We were not able to do a full-time person, but we did hire a .2 FTE at AHS, our safe and inclusive school coordinator, Mary Florence Hudson, who has already begun a comprehensive plan working with Principal Ritchie. They did a Start with Hello week from the very beginning of school and are going to continue to have activities for students throughout the year. Additionally, as the Director of Student Services, there are pieces that a full-time coordinator would do that I will be taking on. as the director. So while she is a .2, I am full-time, and there are portions that I will be addressing. I'd now like to draw your attention to number 2, which is the staff professional development. I don't quite know how to make that. Julie, do you know how to scroll up just a little bit? Thank you very much. So at the beginning of this school year, we brought Sarah White to do social justice competency training district-wide. Sarah was one of the trainers at the Museum of Tolerance that worked with the group of 45 educators that went with the elementary group. She came back and did multiple trainings for our staff. It was very well received, and the social justice competency training is going to be continuing over a 3-year plan to incorporate those. You can see that there's a lot of things that are listed under there. I went to, with 4 other people, I went to a trauma-informed practice training that was excellent, and we are planning on doing a district-wide trauma-informed practice training next year for the 2019-20 school year. I also attended, as did all the elementary principals, a gender spectrum training. The seed circle that has been going on that Principal Deb Brill has brought with her staff. She has also worked with Superintendent Williams, working with the district leadership team all of last year and this year. That's continuing. And our culturally responsive teaching practices are continuing to be our focus. I'm going to switch now to number 4, which is engage in a 1-year shared vision with equity as our lens. So the 3 tenets that we really want to be focusing on this year are culturally responsive teaching, our social justice competencies that we were all trained in the beginning of the year, and our social emotional learning. The social emotional learning posters were put out at the elementary level from day 1, and we're tackling 1 competency a month with conversation starters for our students that can then be expanded upon. The high school is still working on their rollout of social emotional learning and the competencies, and they will be doing those this year. While there are more things under this topic, what I'd really like to highlight is the culturally responsive teaching, the social justice competencies, and the social emotional learning. Those are the 3 things that I hope you hear from me ad nauseum, because I want us to be in that work. The one thing I want us all to be aware of is that we know that we have culturally responsive teaching when every student is meeting or exceeding standards. That's when we know that we have completely embraced culturally responsive pedagogy and culturally responsive teaching, and that is our goal. And we want to close that opportunity gap. We want to make sure that all students are successful and supported in our district. Going from number 4 to number 5, support and student leadership. It was very important to the Albany Coming Together Advisory Board that student voice be heard, that was critical at all levels, high school, middle school, and elementary. And so there is a very long list of things that are being done, one of which is we have the California Healthy Kids Survey, and we are using that in our district leadership team and looking at the data together to inform our practice and see how we can best support our students. We also didn't have as many respondents from the parent group on the California Healthy Kids Survey as we would have liked, so we are doing it again this year. So we've put that survey out again, so we can look at data from last year and this year, but we want to have a more comprehensive look at what our parents are saying that they need for their children. And then classroom visits, weekly meetings with ASB, Administrators are a part of all student success team, 504 meetings, and individualized education plan meetings. And student participation in the Parent-Teacher-Student Association, the school site councils, and the instructional improvement councils. I don't want to just read you a long list, but there's a lot to this document. Finally, I'd love to direct your attention to number 9, which is parent education. At our last meeting on September 26th, it became really clear to us that the parent education is the place where we need the most support from ACT. We need our Albany Coming Together Advisory Committee to help Albany Unified with our parent education focus. We are coming back together in December to discuss some plans that we would like to implement. One is about making sure that our message is getting across about the different education series that we want to present, because in the past there has not always been a robust attendance, and so we think that it's a lack of communication about events, so we want to improve on that. Again, it's a big document, and I invite any questions or comments now or in the future. We're going to be using this as a living, working document, and I appreciate getting to share it with you tonight.
Yeah, I wanted to appreciate everyone that put in all the hard work. It looks like it will be really valuable to the community. I also wanted to say that the California Healthy Kids Survey that students take every year, we're in Albany High leadership, we're trying to enforce that it's really important that students are honest on it and don't just skim through the answers, so we're still working on that.
I appreciate that. We've had that feedback as well from some of our student representatives on the Albany Coming Together Council, so I think we're trying to figure out a different way to roll it out.
Right.
Thank you.
It is used statewide. I imagine the same problem exists in every school, but we poor adults really do look at it and try to act on the results, so the more accurate it is, the better for sure.
I had a question about the first recommendation, hire full-time Director of Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity. What was the name of the person that you had said? Ms. Hudson. Okay, thank you. I wanted to know if they had made changes yet to any of the curriculum at Albany High School, because I know that's a really big concern that a lot of students have had about a very incomprehensive history curriculum, about an ineffective IHS curriculum, a very biased English curriculum. I know that's a really big concern that a lot of students have had, and so I was wondering if Ms. Hudson has been working with Ms. Ritchie and has made any changes yet thus far to the high school curriculum.
Thank you for the comment. It is conversation that we have been having, of course. Yeah, sure. At this time, that is not something that Ms. Hudson is working on. But it is a constant conversation when we come up with an adoption. But I think another thing I would just like to put out, and I haven't consulted, is looking for supplemental materials that we can use to help augment. So those are conversations that we can have to figure out a way to make it more representative.
May I add, please, at the ACT meeting, I do believe the Social Studies Department provided information on what they're doing in their classes, so we can probably get that to you.
Kim?
Yeah, a couple of things. One thing I note on this, that curriculum is number 21 on the list, but I do know that we're dealing with an item later on in the agenda about adequacy of materials, and so we might deal with this a little bit more then when we reach that agenda item. Also, it stated It's stated here that there was an anonymous tip compliment box at the high school last year, but actually there was a tip received over the website, and I know back to item number 1, where Ms. Hudson is using some of the activities described by the Sandy Hook Promise group. The Start with Hello was one of those, but they have a very excellent a set of suggestions regarding anonymous tips that maybe we would be able to implement, since there's clearly a need and already somebody has reached out to do that.
We'll take a look into that.
Thank you.
Charlie?
So thank you for the report. Thank you to ACT for the recommendations. I think it's probably worth our taking a minute and remembering that this board in general tries not to micromanage, that what we try to do is establish general goals and objectives and then ask staff to work out how to implement programs and practices to achieve those goals and objectives. And so just knowing that that's how we normally operate, that that's the role of the board and the role of staff, I would like to support the general principles that are listed here in terms of the recommendations. And I would like to also appreciate the work of staff in trying to think about ways that you can implement these general principles through the local control accountability plan, by bringing ideas on curriculum to the Instructional Improvement Council, and other ways that we have the normal channels and processes that we have in place to try to implement new ideas, new changes. And so I just want to support your efforts in that regard, and also ask that we work with all of the staff to think through some of these recommendations and what it is that we can do to implement them.
Thank you so much. A perfect example of that is number 13, which is about restorative justice, and we've just consented to the middle school behavior matrix, and we have also consented to the high school behavior matrix, which has a huge focus on restorative justice practices, which I think is a perfect example of what you're talking about. Thank you.
Kim?
Sorry, I forgot to mention that recently the English department from the high school came here with a very long list of books, of novels that they wanted, novels and nonfiction actually, that they wanted approved for use as supplemental texts. And they did an incredible job pulling from all over the world authors of color and many female authors, and their effort was devoted exactly to the idea of giving a much more comprehensive view of culture to our students. And so when they came here, we gladly approved those supplemental books. So I look forward to seeing more of that in the future.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
One comment. So I think I briefly mentioned this at the last board meeting. The City of Albany Mayor, the director of UC Village, she's one of the directors of UC Village, and I have been meeting fairly regularly to work on a joint partnership to bring, I'm hoping, during the No Hate Week in November 11 through 17, to do a joint partnership and bring something to the Albany community. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed. We are looking at November 16th in the evening. It'll be held probably at UC Village. We are looking at a short movie, and then having a guest speaker and some maybe small group discussions. So as that fleshes out more, we are going to be advertising that a little bit more. UC Village has been extremely generous in terms of offering their staff as well as the venue. There is a small cost for food And we're hoping to get food locally from our Albany community. And so I'll probably be going to ACT to ask for, a couple of $100. But this is actually going to be, I'm hoping through this will be a nice partnership that we can do. So I'll be happy to update the board at our next board meeting.
Thanks. Anyone else? Public? Thank you very much for the report.
Thank you.
Next, we have a special education update.
Thank you, President Black. I'm going to turn this over to our Director of Special Education, Di Marie, who is giving us our monthly special education update. Ms. Di Marie.
Thank you. Today I prepared a report on placing students because we always get a lot of questions. Why is, students from other schools from our SELPA come here? Why do our kids go there? Why are there kids in placements that aren't Albany? And I put together a quick report on that. The first is kind of explaining what happens and how is a student placed. And there's a typo. The second bullet, the word should actually be goals, not services, but I'll get to that. First of all, the IEP team meets, and that's the Individualized Education Program team. And they take a look at the student. They talk about how the student has done over the last year or however long it's been since they've had a meeting, if it's not their annual. And then they talk about the present levels, what the student is doing well at, and where the areas of needs are. Then, looking at the areas of needs, they put accommodations, modifications, and goals in place. And then services have to be offered that will allow the student to make progress in the general education curriculum and meet their IEP goals. That sounds really quite simple. Most IEP meetings take an hour and a half. Some of them are 3 and 4 and 5 continued meetings. And if you take an hour and a half by 5, I'm too tired to do that now, but it's a lot of hours that the teams put in and a lot of hard work by everyone. And while they make that placement of services, they're always thinking about the least restrictive environment. The goal in special ed is to keep kids in general ed with their typical peers to the highest degree possible. So different services that can be offered, there's specialized academic instruction, and that can be provided in general ed. It can be provided in special ed class, at a non-public school, or as at a residential facility. We have related services. The most common ones are speech, counseling, occupational therapy, adapted phys ed, and there are others that we contract out for that are for more low incidence people with visual and hearing impairments. So let's say the team decides that the school district can't meet the needs of a student. Hopefully, we know about that before the meeting, because then we can do a lot of work before the meeting. Sometimes we don't. Sometimes it comes up at the meeting. But when we start looking at out of district placements, the first thing is we have to have an authorization to release signed by the parent. We can't just send student records willy-nilly everywhere without parent consent. So for each place we're going to consider, the parent needs to consent. So then we put a packet together, and it's called the Referral Packet, and it includes oftentimes of information filled out and then the IEP and the most recent assessment reports. And we send that to places that the district would like to consider, that the parents would like us to consider, that anyone on the team would like us to consider. If they don't have, they usually let us know we have space or we don't have space. If we don't have space, we go on to the next one. If they do have space, the district has to tour, because while I'm the director at Albany, I won't place a student in a place I've never seen. Most of them are very good. Some of them I would not send my animal to, and we have to go and look. And it's a snapshot. We spend 3-4 hours there, but we talk to kids, we talk to staff. So after that, we follow up with the placement options and say, we've seen your place, you've seen our student packet, sometimes our students and parents go and visit. Can you meet the needs of this student? Then, let's say 3 places say yes. The IEP team reconvenes because the district needs to offer a very specific placement. Then, some parents will sign right then and say, yes, send me the IEP. Some wait, and we put the IEP together, and then they might consent in a day or a week or a month. Then, if it's a SILPA placement, we initiate that, or the non-public placement. For SILPA, it's easy, because as soon as we set up transportation, we can ship the students there within a few days. Non-public and residential's not so easy. At that point, we have to send them a contract. And we can't initiate the contract until we have the parent consent. So we send them a contract and hope that they get it back quickly. Sometimes they do, sometimes not so much. Then we have to prepare the board backup and all that jazz, and we have to send it on to the board agenda, and then we have to put it on a meeting, and the board has to vote on it. So timelines, and I think some of them I've covered. We only consider an out-of-district placement when we cannot meet the needs of the students. That would be the only time that we would consider that. Timelines can be very short for a variety of reasons. A student's needs may escalate. There may be a traumatic event that the student can no longer be in the public school. Or on the other end of that, we could get a call from a residential placement and they may say, Susie is ready to step down. And, you know, or we can't meet this kid's needs and you're getting your 20-day notice. I mean, there's a whole variety of things that can happen on either end of the spectrum, which means we have to work fast. Typically, 2 weeks to offer. And what we always consider is the kids' needs. So we have to submit board agenda items 8 days before the meeting. So if you go through all of the steps and the visits and the paperwork and the contracts, that is a process. So while I don't like to bring things to the board after the fact, I truly don't. Sometimes it's the difference of a kid sitting at home without education or me having to ratify. And I think that's all I have.
Thank you. Questions or comments? Charlie?
You know, I think it's worth just noting that the most puzzling part of the process to me is the board actually approving the contracts or having the responsibility to approve the contracts when, in fact, you've done all the work or staff has done all the work and you've been very thorough about it. So as far as I'm concerned, the only consideration for me is just having the confidence to know that, in fact, you have done the work, that process has been followed, and when it comes to the board is not so much a concern to me as just knowing that you have been as thorough as you always are. So thank you.
Okay, thanks. I'll have something to add to that when we get to agenda items introduced by the board. Kind of a more general approach to that, but to that. Rich, did you want to comment?
Hi, Mr. Ritchie, Albany Middle School teacher, special education teacher. Thank you very much for the informative slideshow on how we place students. I think at a very high level it's informative. Today I was hoping for more granular information, things that affect us in the classroom. So I have provided a list to the board last year and just some of the ideas or topics about caseload. Like I would have liked to know what is our caseload by site for transparency to our community. I know my caseload's at 26 and we're only into October and 28 is our set limit. and I know we gain more during the year. Also, I would like to know about the 504s, because I know last year we addressed how we deal with 504s, and that's a general ed function, and yet school resource specialists get tagged to do those assessments, which means we're taking time away from our students. And I clearly heard up here, I think it was Mr. Black, that students come first, and I appreciate that administrators look for that, and students do come first. So as a teacher, you know, that's why I come to work, is to help with students and not to take on other responsibilities when it's a general ed function. So I'd like to know if there's a plan for that. I'd also like to say that the special ed clerk that we had negotiated last year or accepted, and thank you, has been working out really well, at least at the middle school. And her 2.5 hours is definitely full. And as I said last year, you know, we could easily increase that job as she takes on more administrative things, like trying to schedule meetings with 11 people around the table and trying to get everybody there. That eats up a lot of our time that we could be doing our own work with teachers in general, collaboration, supporting students, modification of curriculum, you know, all those administrative things. And we talked a little bit about this last year about, you know, having just a case manager to do all that, and then people teaching, just teaching, doing assessments. So I do appreciate the special ed clerk, but again, I'd like to hear some more granular things, actually in the trenches. And so if you want to address that today, that's great. If you can't, maybe next time we meet, you'll have the more granular details. That would be caseload by case manager, by site, who's doing 504 assessments. Hopefully there's a plan for that. That's not a special ed teacher. So yeah, students come first, and as a teacher, we need to be using our time with our students and supporting our teachers as well, the general ed teachers. Thank you.
Thanks.
I will take about 60 seconds. Caseload, high school, 4 case managers, 2 at 17, 1 at 19, 1 at 25. Middle school, I believe it's 17, obviously 26, and I can't remember what the other one was. The 3 elementary schools, we have under 19. I can certainly bring the numbers. I have them. 504 assessments, when they need an academic assessment, it's done by a special ed teacher. I would say that there are between 5 and 10, or actually 2 and 10 done each year district-wide, and I really don't know. I can tell you how many psychoeds were done for Section 504. But as far as academic, I don't assign them. They're assigned by the principals at that site. So I'm relatively unknowing. I could ask them. I don't know if they track it. And that's all. I'm glad that the middle school clerk is working out. We were thrilled to, we had to hire a new one this year, and we were thrilled to find her, as we were thrilled to find the gentleman who's the clerk, one of the clerks at the high school.
Thanks.
Thank you.
To give you this. Good evening, everyone. My name is Nair Castillo McIntyre. I'm the father of India McIntyre, one of the special education students in first grade at Ocean View. My comments are not specifically related to what was just spoken, but this comes, and maybe my information is might be partially or fully outdated, but I was at a PTA meeting at Ocean View in which we learned that first through third graders, when Ocean View goes through reconstruction, would be placed at the middle school annex, and then fourth through sixth graders, I believe, would be placed in at the high school. And then a couple of weeks ago, we learned that the relocation would be delayed because of some issues with the study that was done on the soil. And so this, I believe, is an opportunity to consider where to place the special education students in elementary school. The annex, the middle school annex, I believe might be a little bit, while perhaps safe, might be too restrictive for the special education students, and that would go against the mandate of providing the access to education in the least restrictive environment for the students. And so I would like to submit for the board's consideration and for the superintendent the idea of placing the special education students in elementary school all at Cornell, which won't be affected by any of the relocation, and which provides the advantage of, one, being safe. Students who might be at University Village don't need to go across all of the town in order to get to the middle school annex. It provides the least restrictive environment because it allows the students in special education to still have interactions with the rest of the student population. And also it has the advantage and the convenience that most of the infrastructure to provide the special services that students with special needs require are already in place for occupational therapy, physical therapy, adaptive PE, and so forth. So if this could be possibly an item that you include in a future Board of Education meeting in the agenda proper, that would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Thanks. That's an interesting idea. And we are going to have an agenda item on our plan for temporary housing. And so if you can be sure to include special ed students in that report, that would be great.
Thank you.
If you want, you can email me your comments or suggestions.
Sure.
My email is released. It's vwilliams@ausdk12.org.
I have it. I sent you a thing up with my daughter.
Thank you.
Terrific. Okay, thanks. Anyone else? Ross.
Just to expand a little on that, I think, you know, when change happens, we have opportunities to re-examine old assumptions. So, you know, we have had an assumption that we've got 3 K-5 elementaries for the whole of the time I've known Albany, but it didn't always used to be that way. So if you had a K2 or a K3 school, similarly, we have, you know, McGregor as a continuation high school, and we're talking about whether or not we should have an alternative high school. So it would be fine by me to consider everything from changing distributions of things to changing the grade range and permanence for some of these schools. I think we should sort of be prepared to unstick variables where it makes for more flexibility or better approaches to meet everybody's sort of differing needs.
Thanks. Okay.
So I want to be able to make my comments. I didn't get a chance to be able to comment on the last report that was given, but at the last school board meeting, I asked all of you to also make a commitment to make sure that it was in the annual calendars, holidays that reflected students. So for example, Latino Heritage Month, the end of it is this Friday. And right now, several of us parents are trying to get together to have a Day of the Dead event here at Albany High School in the Little Theater to be able to promote, instill some pride for our students and also have a cultural exchange. Include Latino Heritage Month within the school district calendar, Cinco de Mayo, Day of the Dead, and what's also missing in here is LGBTQ Pride Week, and being able to have that and everybody feeling a part of the community. And lastly, on special ed, I want to be able to thank for the report that was provided. Thank you. But it's also important that there are no silos for anybody. And this is the first report of the school year, and I'm really happy that at least it's now being included as part of the agenda, and I appreciate that. I know it took a year, but you got here, and thank you so much for doing it. There's still a lot of work to be done, but I think there's a lot more education that needs to be able to be offered. But teachers should not be asked to take class time from being with the kids to be able to do these reports. And that's one thing that I know that we're continuing to work. This is going to be a continuous job. It's not all going to be done over a few months or a few weeks, but this is just something I want to make sure that there's a commitment there, and I want to acknowledge the incredible work that's been done so far, but that we still have more to do, and thank you. I also want to say thank you so much for being in the ELAC meeting last week. She had to go back and forth, and I've never seen anyone run that quickly from the school library to the very back of the hall, and she kept going back and forth, and when they want to recognize administrators, thank you so much for taking the time. She had her daughter there. I know how difficult it is because I have to take my son to a lot of meetings and picket lines and strikes, so I know what that's like, and I just want to thank everybody. We may not always agree, but I recognize the incredible work that folks do. Thank you.
Olga, can you send me any list of observances? Because I know that I think I have a lot of them, but you mentioned one that I don't have. And I'd like to have them, as many as you can give me, because we do try to put them on our calendar. I send them out to the principals. Okay. Just email it to me.
Thanks.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Cheryl Thies, and I am a parent in the district and also an advocate at the Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund. First of all, I want to thank Ms. Marie for her report. I think it's really important to keep special education on the agenda and to keep making sure that there is the kind of transparency that families need. I want to speak to the comment by the parent who's concerned about the placement of kids and just say it ties directly in with Diane's report. If you start moving kids out of the least restrictive environment where they can have recess and lunch and be in a regular elementary school environment, you start to drive, I can tell you I take the calls, parents to feel like maybe I should look at a non-public school or a more segregated setting because I'm not getting the benefits of a more inclusive setting. So these things go together. So I hope as you're doing this planning that you really make sure that you're thinking about that these are all our kids and that they all belong together. However we move them, we need to move them together as a group. And then finally, I want to say that one of the things that I hope we can do, and I think there's really a commitment in special education here to do it, is to make sure that even when we remove students from the regular public school setting, that we always include IEP goals about how we're going to bring them back. Because I think a lot of families feel like, thank you, I think a lot of families feel like, okay, it's not working here, we need an out, or the situation's not tenable, or my child's constantly in trouble, or they're not getting an education. And so a non-public school or a different setting can seem like a lifeline. But long-term, the research is just overwhelming that kids do the best in the regular public school environment in terms of their academics. And so parents will talk to me and tell me how relieved they are, and I will always ask them, is there a goal about a year from now, how much the child will be in a less restrictive setting, how we will bring them back. They belong to Albany, they belong to our community, and I don't want to feel like families are, reaching out and going elsewhere because they feel like it's their only option without a real recognition that the message that they should hear is we want your child, we want them back here, they're important to us, they're an important part of our community, and so that they aren't just feeling banished. I think there are an awful lot of families, and I'm not speaking just about Albany here at all. We work in 3 counties, San Joaquin, Alameda, Contra Costa. We serve all the schools, 50,000 plus students in special education. So I talk to a lot of parents, and many of them, a great majority of them will tell me, all I want is to send my kid to the neighborhood school. But if it's not working, I have to look at other options. But when we look at those other options, our goal should always be, this is a temporary solution to support this child intensively at a higher level for a period of time. We want your baby back. That's what parents want to hear, and I just want to make sure the board hears that message loud and clear. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so running about half an hour behind. Charlie's going to have to leave us at 9. So let's move on if we can. We have a discussion of district goals. Now, this is a first step. We put it on the agenda now, even though there's an election coming up, because we need to have the district goals before we can write the superintendent's evaluation instrument. And it's getting a little late in the year to do that. But I am going to suggest that once the new board is seated, that it be re-agendized for review and possible modification with the new board members included. That said, I think we can still have a productive discussion about what our district goals should be. We need to be careful. In the past, we've talked about board goals, but these aren't goals for the board. They're goals for the district. The board oversees them, and the board might identify one or more goals that it's more the board's responsibility to see through, but all these goals are for the district, not specifically for the board. That said, we have in the packet we have the goals that we set for last year, and what else is in here? In the backup. Is that all? Or was there? We have the strategic plan, we have LCAP. The goals should all those need to be aligned. We need to keep that in mind. So,
and I do have on the screen, so I have the ability to track changes or make adjustments as needed.
Okay, so these were the existing district goals. We can modify them, replace them, or add to them, whatever you guys feel you want to do. I know that Kim had a few goals she wanted to discuss tonight. So maybe as a starting point, Kim, do you want to lead off?
Sure. First of all, I think that this is a big job. You know, Paul, you just mentioned we have the LCAP that's a driver for the district, and we have our mission, and we also have these goals, and there is a job to align all of them and to try to see where the work that we can do this year, you know, what are the next steps that are possible this year, and how also we need to set ourselves up so that we're also looking into the future, so that we're planning a few years ahead, because you never want to just have the urgent items in front of you right now be the only thing that you're dealing with. You also want to be able to move in a direction, and sometimes that takes several years of work. So if we start at the top here, the goal about communication, and I'd love for this to be a discussion. I'll try to throw a few things out, but I don't want to talk a whole lot right now. I think there's some big questions here. You know, using social media to connect with students. That's something that there's a lot of work involved in doing that and figuring out how and what the channel is. I also think that we need to consider doing more contact with our parents via text or social media, because fewer people are checking their email regularly. Email is getting to be a less successful way of communicating with parents, even though I know that the survey that was done by Dax and Val did indicate that email is still the preferred method, but I think we need to prepare and look forward a little bit to the point where that's no longer going to be the preferred method, and be ready to step into a new technology there. And I would also say, in terms of communication, that last year, as part of the budget process, the district attempted to discern what the Albany community really values about their educational system. You know, what do you want us to keep? And you know, and I think that the reason that survey didn't go over very well was because it was too vague. And I think that we might need to reach out to our community, which I feel has undergone a great deal of demographic change in the past 20 years, to get a better sense of what Albany wants from its schools. And I think that was the attempt last year, but I think we really didn't get what we wanted from that survey. And I think we need to try that again in a much more granular way, using Rich's word, and list things and have people rank. And I think that will enable us to see what is valued most in our area.
Okay. You had some other suggestions for additional goals. Do you want to go into those now, or leave them for later?
I think what I had, just to give people a starting point to things, I noted, is reducing student stress a goal of the board? That's somewhat embedded in the idea of nurturing the whole child, educating the whole child. But if reducing student stress is the articulation of that for the next few years, then there's certain issues that come up. We have mental health professionals at the high school and we have our wellness committee that would tell us that key issues there would involve calendar and homework and bell schedule and those sorts of issues. I also, somebody tonight earlier mentioned McGregor. It's come up at board meetings before that McGregor is not an alternative high school. It cannot accept students under 16, but there's children that are 15 and 16 that clearly have need, and but yet we haven't stated as a board that this is something that we want to happen. We also have some differences in our learning communities about mastery-based approaches. And I'm not an educator. I'm just a community member here on the board. But I think that having disparities in the classrooms that our children are tracking through, maybe the teachers, maybe we can sort of task the sites and the teachers to see if something can be aligned there so that we don't have these abrupt changes in approaches. And lastly, the ACT report that Carrie Nierheim gave earlier talked about making our schools more welcoming place for all students, but yet we lack any type of measurement of that success. How do we see that? We've clearly stated that the California Healthy Kids Survey is a very imperfect tool for that. So we're putting a lot of things in place with the idea of making our schools more inclusive, more welcoming, of closing the achievement gap. But besides standardized tests and the California Healthy Kids surveys, we don't have a measurement of our success.
Thank you. A lot of good ideas there. Charlie, did you want to jump in?
Thank you for sharing those, Kim. I am going to go in a slightly different direction. I think all of those are important, and I think they represent not just the coming year's goals, but every year, goals for every year. That is, there's so many areas that we should be working on, not just this year, but the year after and the year after that. And so what I would like us to do is to exercise perhaps a little bit more discipline as a board and identify 2 or 3 of last year's goals, or maybe it includes something new, just 2 or 3 of what we think are the highest priority goals for the district that need to get done this year. And I have my own opinion as to what some of those should be, but I think for us to be able to give staff meaningful direction, it would be for us to really drill down and say, here's 2 or 3 that we really want to see completed during this school year. We want to see progress on everything else, but 2 or 3 that are the highest priority. And we need to be able to come together and say, as a board, there are 2 or 3 that we think are the highest priority, and that's what we want staff to direct as much of their time and energy to as they can.
Great. Anyone else want to jump in at this point? I'm going to comment then that I think you're both right. I think it's very important for us to have long-term goals. I think one of the problems we had with last year's goals was that they weren't clearly anything that could be done in 1 year. So we were a little bit unclear at the end of the year how we were to judge our progress. So I agree with Charlie that it would be great to have goals that could be addressed within the course of a year, with the proviso that things happen, and sometimes you need to shift in order to address things that need immediate attention. But Charlie, if you have some specific ideas of things you think could be done in a year, I'd love to hear them.
Well, the 2 from last year that I felt we really needed to prioritize for this coming year are a little further down on the screen. They're number 3 and number 4. Those are the 2 that I picked out as what I think should get done this year.
So budget and...
But that's just me.
I put the...
Yeah, we deal with emergencies.
As we're doing notes right now. And then the one that we must create and ensure implementation of protocols?
For emergencies.
Okay, so I'm going to say clearly we have a mandate from the county to make budget adjustments this year. And we need to understand how, and this process is underway. We have a budget advisory committee. So if we want to have, and this is going to be an ongoing thing for several years, but what specifically do you think we can accomplish in 1 year, or should be trying to accomplish in 1 year?
So again, I have a very specific suggestion, and that is I would like to see at first interim if we can, at second interim if we can't do it at first interim, and in our next adopted budget, a positive certification.
Yes, we would always like to see it.
Well, that's just, you know, one way of putting a priority, or just saying how much I think needs to actually get done this year.
That's a big challenge this year, I agree. Most years that's kind of just a given, but this year that is a huge challenge, because the approval that we got from the county was based on $2.5 million in cuts ongoing. And we haven't identified those cuts. So a positive certification is a difficult goal that we really need to achieve. I agree with that.
See what other people think.
Jacob?
I'm a little confused on why that would be difficult if we're making $2.5 million in cuts. Won't that leave us?
It's difficult to make the cuts, that's why.
But we have to.
Yes, we have to, but it's not easy.
It's not hard. Well, I mean, these are tied into the superintendent's evaluation, right? So to put something up there that's going to happen, and then to later on say, oh,
no,
the superintendent met the goal, we have to cut the $2.5 million.
This is a starting point for the superintendent's evaluation. It's no need that this would be one of the goals on her evaluation.
You started off saying...
Yes, the district goals are a starting point for the superintendent's evaluation instrument. But the superintendent's evaluation instrument, that's just a starting point. It's not it's not the instrument itself.
Right, but I'm not okay with putting a goal that we're going to meet. We've already told the county we're going to cut $2.5 million, and then to say, oh, it's up there because it's difficult to do. Well, yeah, it's difficult to do because there's going to be some programs that are going to be affected. But as far as us actually doing it, it's not difficult to make the cuts.
Do you have other suggestions for goals that we should have?
Well, this is just the first discussion, you know, and I don't know if we're going to get to the whole hour because I know Charlie has stuff to do and there's other stuff. I'm just trying to be clear about putting goals that, in my opinion, are not difficult to meet.
Well, yeah, goals that are not.
That would be one.
Goals that are not a given. Goals that
you really have to work for.
Okay.
Opposed to throwing out a goal that, in my opinion, is going to happen.
Okay, Charlie, you were talking about the bullet at the bottom of the screen there. Do you have a specific goal around that?
No, I think I'd like to hear from other people.
Okay. Who else wants to jump in here? Kim?
I do think that the budget is the fundamental work of this year, and I think that communication surrounding the budget is critical. So I think that that encompasses a lot of both bullet 1 and bullet 3. We hope to never have an emergency, but but you never know. So I do think that it's urgent that we address the implementation of protocols that will help us to face large-scale emergencies. So I'd also like to see that prioritized. And I think that could be, there's already some of the bullets right there within that paragraph about exactly what needs to happen and what those actions would be. I would put in another pitch for, I think that we do need to address student stress in the district. And I think that we do need to have some sort of ways of measuring our success in that area and in making our schools welcoming places. And I would be happy to try to work on defining that more clearly and see if I can't, I'll deliver that to Val, and then when it's articulated in detail, maybe it's something the board could discuss.
Okay. Thanks. With regard to another one of the things that you mentioned, Kim, the mastery-based grading, I think where we have heard most about that is with regard to math classes. And I believe that the middle school and the high school have very different approaches toward this, and there's some tension. At least I got that feeling from reports that we got on math programs from the middle school and from the high school, where the middle school seems to be giving students opportunities to improve their grades, and at the end of the year, telling them that they've mastered the material and sending them on to the high school with a recommendation that they go into a more advanced math class. And then the high school evaluating them and saying, no, they don't belong in this class. And I'd like to, I don't know what the specific goal would be, but I would like to have a specific goal around that to understand the nature of the issue, because there are a couple of important things that come out of that. Math being a gateway course is intimately involved in the achievement gap. I think if we looked at those numbers of students that we saw at a recent board meeting in the advanced math classes, just going in, we saw a gap, a cultural and ethnic gap between students who are in those classes, in the advanced classes, and students who aren't. And we need some kind of affirmative action, I think, to give the students who have been disadvantaged and have not come into high school with all of the advantages that other students have had, emotional or cultural or academic, to give them the support they need to succeed in those advanced classes, so that by the time they're seniors, they're on their way to any career that they want. I think that's really important, and I don't see it happening right now. I would love the board to put some focus on that. And there's a long-term goal there, and I would like to identify some short-term goals around that. Ross?
Just a little comment on that. I think it's worse than they're coming to the high school and being placed otherwise. They're going to the high school, being placed in classes, and then
moved out,
shed from those classes after doing poorly on tests. So they've been sort of acculturated to a learning environment at the middle school that's very interactive and iterative and oriented towards mastery, and then suddenly hitting these weeder classes of, I'm sorry, you're not a math person now, which I think is a horrible message to send. I think we have to put up there as a priority as a district school construction and managing to get as much as we can for the money we'll have. I am not at all confident that we can necessarily keep striding forward. If we run into delays of a year, et cetera, we may have to very seriously reconsider what we're building. And I think we're whistling in the dark a bit on having only a portion of one school done, a hole in the ground for a second, and just optimistic thinking on the other two. So I'd really like to have staying atop the whole school construction thing be a priority.
Okay. Others? Gail, I see you thinking. Do you have any thoughts for us?
I do. My comment is unrelated to any of the other conversations we've been having, and actually is kind of a suggestion for another bullet point, so another goal, which I don't know. I know that we're trying to refine goals right now, but I personally think that as the voice of the students, it is important, the next idea that I'm about to state. I had wanted to put a goal into this list talking about our curriculum, our district-wide curriculum, not for any specific subject, but just what is the attitude of which we are teaching our students. And I know I've advocated for this before, and I think I'll probably be advocating for it many other times, but I believe that we need to ensure that students are educated on oppression of minority groups and understand the consequences of hateful actions and hateful speech, as well as sexual assault. I think that has been a large problem in the Albany School District for a very long time. I think it will continue to be unless we are taking very serious and tangible steps towards that, and I would like to put that into this list of goals right here, because that's a complaint that many Albany students have been having. I've heard those complaints from the elementary school students when I go into their classrooms with Speak. I've heard those complaints from middle school students when I was one, and from my sister's friends. I've heard those complaints from many high school students, just being one and being surrounded by us. I share those concerns as well, and I think that we need to be taking tangible steps, like I had said, to be having an ethno-relative district-wide curriculum that teaches issues of oppression, and then also has empathy development implemented into that, so that students actually understand when they make a certain action, what the consequences of that is, because I think that is definitely lacking in a lot of students. And if we're trying to prepare our students for going out into the world and being able to be productive members of society. I think that not being a bigot is definitely a big part of that. So that was my idea for another bullet point on here. Yeah.
No, that's terrific. Thank you. Russ?
I had meant to second the comment about student stress, but maybe just to ask the question of why we talk about it and nothing comes of it. I think Charlie gave a very impassioned speech on the calendar, that he wouldn't vote for this new calendar that didn't address the problem, that we're putting kids in this bind about studying over the holiday break. And so it's either, we're not hearing well enough the issues of student stress, or we're not able to implement solutions to student stress. And so it's sort of a meta question of how can this board engage to resolve the things we do flag as critical issues. Do we need new mechanisms to be more directly responsible to student interests and concerns? I mean, it actually goes back to your most recent question, too. We end up, I think, at a very attenuated end of something must be done, well, we should do something, rather than actionalize our what we're hearing, what we're feeling.
Yeah, I'd go back and endorse another one of Kim's suggestions, which is, I think, related to student stress and possibly to the achievement gap, which is the fact that we don't have an alternative high school and we try to make McGregor work as one. And we've talked about this before. We've had reports on McGregor. We've talked about its function. I have personal communication from a former high school principal, who you all know, Ron Rosenbaum, that when he was principal, he just put kids into McGregor who were not officially qualified to be in McGregor because they were too young, but being as close as we had to an alternative high school, that's where he felt they fit. And I think to a lesser extent perhaps, but that still kind of happens today, but kids who need an alternative high school in their freshman or sophomore year, we don't have a placement for them, and some of them suffer. So I would like that to be, it's probably not a one-year goal, but certainly in the course of a year it could be investigated. We could find out what it takes to make the change and what the consequences and possible unintended consequences might be. Yeah.
Yes, I think you put your finger on one of the difficulties here for forming these goals is that we don't know those things. We can't just sort of set a goal, like McGregor will attain the status of an alternative high school until we know what all the administrative steps are, the process of submission of those papers, and somebody who is an educator has to come back and tell us that.
Right. Plus what it would mean to lose a continuation high school.
Right. The unintended consequences, as you said. So it makes it difficult to write up a set of goals because at some level we don't know what is obtainable and what isn't.
Right. But perhaps the goal could just be finding out.
Yeah, and that kind of goes back maybe to something that Jacob touched on, which is, we do want to see progress. Just a Google search isn't going to cut it. We want to see real progress and steps made, and sometimes that can be difficult for us to form the goals correctly.
Yeah. Okay. So going back to the first goal, which was communication. I know this has come up in candidate forums already this year. It's something that the board has been talking about as long as I've been on the board. And we always have this idea we need to improve communication. Do you think we can come up with some specific steps that are measurable and achievable in the course of a year that will improve communication. I think we need to start breaking it down into specific, achievable steps in order to get there. As long as it's just kind of a vague goal and say, yeah, we have to do better, we never quite get there. And it might be unachievable to have perfect communication. I think it is. Mm-hmm. But I think there's pretty general consensus we can do better.
Yeah.
So any thoughts on that? I'm thinking maybe the next step, we've identified things that everyone seems to agree are important as priorities, but they need to get translated into specific goals, and maybe we need maybe a couple of, single or pairs of board members working on portions of these to bring back to another meeting with specific goals to talk about. I think we could get there.
I already volunteered to try to do some of that, and I'll just reiterate that. I would like to be a part of this process in terms of breaking down these goals and making them more specific.
Okay, so I think you have talked at length about communication. I know you've worked very hard on it in your time on the board, and you also have talked about the student stress. I know you're on the Wellness Committee and have been very interested in that. You want to take those two on?
Absolutely, yeah.
Michaela, do you want to work with Kim on those? They seem like they'd be natural things for a student board member to work on.
Yeah, can I make a comment?
Sure.
I would say that student stress is largely related to what I had been talking about earlier, and when students feel like they're in an environment where they are targeted, sometimes even more than, I would argue much more, than our general culture, like when you have female students who are in classes, I don't know, that are in classes and they're being talked over, then of course, they're not going to be encouraged to pursue higher level courses, or if you have, I don't know, I'm looking at the statistics from the last meeting that we went to about the math classes, and it's like very clear, the achievement gap that we've been talking about, it's so clear that when you have students who don't feel like that the school environment is for them, or that this is a place for them, of course there's going to be like insane amounts of stress, and of course there's going to be this achievement gap. So I think that the goals that you were talking about also largely have to do with the goal that I had put forth about district-wide curriculum reform. So yes, I'd be happy to work with you on that.
Thank you. Yes.
Okay, Charlie, the ones you mentioned were budget and dealing with emergencies. Do you want to try to make specific goals around those?
Sure, I could do that. I'm happy to help anybody else on others as well. I endorse the idea that we need to have specific steps that we identify.
Okay, Jacob, is there anything you want to?
Well, I had a question about that bullet point. If you can scroll back down a little bit, Val, please.
I'm sorry, can you?
The other direction, back towards the original bullets?
The one about if there's an emergency.
Yeah, go back up.
Hang on, I really apologize, but
No problem.
Charlie had two, and I want to make sure I captured the second. Was it budget, Charlie?
Budget and emergencies.
Okay, hold on, let me just get to the budget part, so I just make sure I have the...
There it is. There's budget.
Thank you.
And then the one Jacob wants to look at is the one at the bottom there, and
And Jacob, you wanted the next...
Well, I had a question about it.
Yeah.
Okay, so when it says we must create and ensure the implementation of protocols that specify how the administration and board will work together to govern a district in case of large-scale emergencies. So that's separate from the incidents of intolerance that we experience, right? But to my understanding, that first part, we already have the concentric circles and certain things. So once again, like I said, to list that as a goal, and we're already doing it, I would like to focus more on
the second.
Specifically, yes, on the second part. What will we do if and when something like this happens again.
You want to work with Charlie on that?
Sure.
Yeah, good. Thank you.
I wouldn't mind working on the budget one with Charlie as well.
Okay, so hold on. So Troy Blanchard.
Great.
Okay. And, you know, I'm sorry, Michaela, when you and Kim are working on your goals, do pursue your ideas about the consequences of oppression, including in, if it can be included in the stress goal, that's fine. If it's a separate goal, that's fine too. But, you know, don't lose track of it.
Yeah.
Charlie?
Yeah, I actually just wanted to support Michaela's including that. It's just off the bottom of the screen right now. I think something that comes to us as a clear priority of students is a goal that we should be thinking of as a district goal, not just as a suggestion.
No, absolutely.
So if we can work on that one too, and actually put some specific steps in there, I think that would be very helpful.
Great.
Is it possible to take the suggestion around the curriculum that you had mentioned? So the curriculum, the mathematics, and I'm not sure about the stress, but the two sections here really do have to do with student achievement. And so when I look at this bullet here, I know it says review high school graduation requirements, but we're really talking about a student achievement.
Yes.
So I'm wondering if there's a way to either rework this second bullet to incorporate the 2 or 3 bullets that really have to do with closing our opportunity gap.
Yes, I think the mastery-based grading is closely related to the second bullet. I'm not sure about, even though Michaela's goal involves curriculum, I'm not sure it involves it in that way. I think it might be separate. They're all related, but I think it can be handled separately. But I think you're right, that second bullet and the articulation of mastery-based grading between middle school and high school certainly can be.
And really, the McGregor issue probably belongs in that same group as well.
Probably belongs in that as well, yeah.
So it was the mathematics, mastery-based grading, McGregor, and it was also the, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, Michaela, but some of the things that you're talking around, making sure that students have an education about oppression of minority groups and consequences. This is sort of an example or part of the culture responsive teaching, I think that right, Dr. Nairheim was talking about, right? Student engagement and having meaning in what you're learning and how it applies to the real world. So, so maybe adding this piece in here. I'm not sure I can put the whole thing in there, but I kind of put it all underneath this sort of culture responsive teaching and practices.
I'm not sure where you're going with this.
I'm thinking so this suggestion says students are educated in oppression of minority groups, putting that underneath this bullet here, sort of rewording this instead of high school graduation, rewording that and incorporating mathematics, mastery-based grading, McGregor, and...
I don't see it as the same goal.
You don't see it? Does it be 2 separate goals?
Can I make a comment about that? Yeah. I think that the suggestion that I had made as a goal can be incorporated into the McGregor issue that we were talking about, and also, what was the other one that there was?
Mathematics.
There we go. I think that can be, the issue that I'm talking about can be applied to both of those. I also think that it should be its own goal as well, and I think it should be worked into those and also be its own. And I also think that if you have implementations of of that nature, of that goal that I had put forth, then like after that will happen the wage gap possibly being closed, hopefully. I mean, I think it would take a very long time, but I think that first comes the goal that I had suggested, and then comes, the wage gap closing as well as the McGregor issue being not as much of a problem. So I think that they do lead into each other, and I think that's a lot of what we had read about in the culturally responsive teaching book. And I also think that it can be its own goal in and of itself.
Yeah, I think you're right. They're closely related. I think it's just occurred to me. It feels like there are two things. There's curriculum, which isn't a separate class. Let's just teach a class on oppression. It's incorporating it into the entire curriculum. But beyond that, there's professional development. There's living it, not just teaching it, so that culturally responsive teaching means that you don't ignore a kid who's holding their hand up because you don't think they're smart enough to answer the question, and that might be based on who they are rather than what they've shown they know. And that's an extreme example, but I think that sort of thing happens. The more assertive, aggressive students get to speak more in class, and those are often the boys. That sort of thing. So that I think that there has to be a consciousness all the way down from the administration through teachers, through students, of that dynamic. In addition to having it part of the curriculum, it has to be just part of the culture. How we turn that into goals, I'm not sure, but that's certainly something to be working on. So, Ross, is there anything here in particular you want to work on?
Well, I think I've absolutely raised the whole issue of continuation and alternative high schools, and I don't know as we have to abandon one to get the other.
No, you're right.
I think I was the largest source of that particular bullet point on alternative approaches to things, resources outside of the district, online courses, et cetera. And I would fold these all into a big bin of how can we help students find their fit if they really need to thrive in a more alternative environment rather than have Ron off the books move them. We ought to have a district that's flexible enough to accommodate them. And but that's at a range of things that relates to things like school time and place. It relates to whether or not we have K-5s versus K-8s. I don't think we're going to make radical changes necessarily, but I think we should be sort of on the road to being flexible enough to make changes. And I agree that we don't know enough to make those changes, but people like Darren at the high school is absolutely perceiving alternative education in ways that should inform the district.
Yes, I agree. So do you want to take on alternative education, and McGregor is just a piece of that?
Written pretty broadly, yes.
Yes, good. Okay. I'm interested in the math articulation. I'd be glad to take that one on. Jacob?
Are you done?
Yeah, go ahead.
If you could go to the last bullet point, Bob, please.
I'm sorry, I want to make sure I just capture the math articulation. Where was that? Sorry, I'm going to find this again.
That's a new one.
All right, let me get down here. Oops. There. Oh, there it is. Thank you. I just want to make sure I get you in there. The last bullet?
You mean
Just
the last original bullet?
The last black one?
Correct. Well, now it's got the red dot next to it, but...
This one right here?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I've been on the board for 2 years, and I still don't understand what my role is. And this came up a little bit at the retreat as far as I would like to get some more clarification on that. As far as, I don't want to say too much, but...
No, that's good, and yes, there can be a goal around that. That might be a question more of professional development for the board than an independent goal, but it's something that's certain, and that also, I think, is something that it's going to be very important with new members on the board. If you're having a problem with it, think of somebody who's coming on new. So,
well, I'll touch on it a little bit. I hope that the one or multiple new board members have a little clearer understanding about the way things work. And I don't want to get into it right now. I mean, I'm sure you guys all know how I feel and what I'm talking about.
Sure. Does anyone in the audience want to jump in here and give some thoughts?
So I want to thank Michaela for bringing up the issue of the math, right? And back in August, Ross, you made the comment and you had asked Val if she could follow up with finding out what are the numbers of students from the high school going to Tilden Prep as an alternative for math. So I'm looking forward to hearing about that information. But I also want to be able to just talk to you about why this conversation of math has become such an issue for families of color here in Albany. I feel like the best way to address it is having the Albany Middle School and Albany High School math departments working collectively on the curriculum. Some of the tests that are given at the high school are not being handed to the kids so that they can go back and work on this. And as a parent, I can't help my child or even get a tutor to ask the tutor work on this part of the problem. This is what you didn't understand. Because they're treating the tests as if they were proprietary information. And it shouldn't be that way. As big as I am a supporter of the teachers, you also have to make sure that in order for my child to learn and understand, I can't have any interventions for my child if they're not, I can't even see the test. So how can we work with them? Then the other is getting the information about how many children are going outside of Albany High School to do their math. And I know that for children in special ed, most of the reasons is because Common Core, your student who has a learning disability finally conquers one part, and then they change it the next week to like, now we're gonna do another part. And for children like my son, it's really a huge struggle in being able to master. I love Mr. Liu and Ms. Fisher at AMS. They make math exciting. I shouldn't use the term sexy, but they make it fun for the kids that they really wanna not leave the classroom. And that is a huge change for my son and being excited about math. But this is why it's become such a huge issue. We don't get copies of those tests. For the middle school, yes, but when children were doing excellent in math in the 8th grade at AMS and they've transferred over to the high school, there's been such a huge drop-off that there are in a very lost position. And we actually had this meeting at the middle school with Latino parents, and we're like, you know, not everybody has the same amount of money to be able to hire private tutors, but we want to be able to, there has to be a really big intervention. And I think that that's something that as a short-term goal, whether it's, is the answer at Tilden Prep that, do they have something magical that they're teaching that's why all the kids are running to that school? How can our math departments in the middle school and high school work a little bit better in being able to communicate? And what interventions can the district apply right now before the end of the school year to be able to help students, especially coming into the 9th grade? That's where you need to be able to focus. And it's not just children of color. It's all 8th graders that are coming from the middle school that are trying to grasp the understanding of it. Then as far as cultural response on oppression, I would ask that you be flexible in inviting, just like universities have teaching professors, have the AMS and Albany High School have teaching guests that'll come for 6 to 8 weeks that'll lead up to Black History Month, Latino Heritage Month. And in those weeks, being able to have a project that they're building into, but it's not just for Latinos and African American students, it's something that the whole school has to be able to be a part of, and that all those history classes have a guest that comes in every week, but they're working towards a plan that sets the community standard, right, about where we want to be. And not everyone is right now, you know, lefty, but at the end of the day, what I mean by that is at every dinner table tonight and since November of 2016, The topics at our dinner tables are politics, whether we like it or not. And our children's opinions have evolved from having a distinction about what's going on in the Supreme Court. And these are children in elementary school, in middle school, and the high school. And the only way that we develop that is being able to have opportunities such as the ones you guys are in to be a little bit flexible and create programs that will allow guest teachers within the history classes to be able to start having, you don't just pick a teacher and just all of a sudden it's done. I understand the budget challenges we have. But as board members, you do have an opportunity to say, why don't we think ahead, as all of you are mentioning, 2-3 years. If you want something in the immediate, think about spring of next year to invite teachers for Black History Month, teachers that'll be part of the projects that students can work on, but not just kind of put it in a silo and how much is that going to cost us? I welcome that there's a lot of parents within these engagement groups, a Jewish parent engagement group, the Latino parent engagement group, the Black family engagement group, that they are more than willing to come in and host and be part of those classes. But our children are not going to learn if our board isn't flexible enough to see how can we introduce that to our kids. The other thing for you board members that you guys are talking about communicating with parents, I would welcome that you invite yourselves to the parent engagement groups, to all of them, but also considering starting with one elementary school where you have a welcome parent center where parents can engage with each other. If you're new to the district, Paul, then let me introduce you. This is the PTA. These are the different school functions that the school has. Does your child have any support? Does your child need any additional supports? And at the district, I've had my challenges when I've had to sign up my nephew last year, who was non-English speaking. It was such a huge challenge. I even had to say at one point, if I was homeless, just to be able, it was so hard to show documentation that this is I'm his guardian. And thank you, Kim, for helping me with that very much, and Val for doing that, and Diane. Thank you. Marie, I keep confusing you and calling you but Marie. I also would ask that you guys do, growing up in LA, is dinner with my board member. So what we would do is parents, my mom, families don't have a lot of money, but they will welcome you into their home and invite other families. And sometimes you got to go on tour to hear the good, the bad, and the ugly. And for somebody who's very involved in politics, I can tell you, it's harsh listening to some realities about where improvements can be made. But it's also reinvigorating because it allows you to go back, take inventory, and see what else do I need to do? How better can I represent the families? And in these challenging times right now, we welcome you into our homes. We want you to understand the struggles that our children are going to. But when you speak in reference to us as they, them, or those are our babies. These are our babies, and Joaquin has a name, just like every one of the other families. And all we want to make sure is teach our children that we're not invisible, and that we are also valued, and that their culture and where they come from is also taken into consideration. But I welcome any one of you to make yourselves available, and in the communications, send out a monthly email. Don't send a mail. Parents don't like all that mail that they're getting, but send an email. Introduce yourselves to families, even if you guys have to do a rotation about what projects you guys are working on, and have every board member for the next 6 months, and then start over again about topics that you're working on and goals that you guys are setting on here, right? As far as the evaluation and the survey that was sent out last year, I've been in a lot of parent groups and meetings and engaging with a lot of families. And one of the things that we lacked in that survey, feeding on what Kim talked about, is simply there wasn't an option A, option B, option C. What would you do if the cuts were tomorrow? Would you want to give up school sports? Would you want to give up construction? Would you what would be the alternatives? And that's something that the survey did not allow for families. So it was just, there was a lot of non-response. But I do believe that if you if you have two different things that you can compare, then one family can look at it and say, I don't agree with either, we should do this instead. But there'll be at least a little bit more feedback. These are my 2 cents, and I really am excited about all the goals you guys are setting for yourselves, but you should also be clear that there are short-term goals and long-term goals. And as an officer for a trust fund, I can tell you, we have our 2, 3, and 5-year goals, and that's something that you guys could also do. But here on the short term, think about all the families that are on your shoulders and carry that with a lot of responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you. Kim.
First, I want to point out that I noted something that Olga and Ross agree on, because Ross has been talking about not being able to take home math tests for many years. So this was a notable alignment, I noticed. And then a few comments about the math. I do think that all of the math teachers at the middle school and at the high school are deeply dedicated and are doing what they feel are best practices. And I do believe that they are working in collaboration now to try to smooth out some of these rough spots. But it is true that last year there were the middle school sent 72 kids into Math 1-2, and a third of those were dropped out of the class. And this year the high school eliminated the Math 1+. I think that Alexia told us at the last meeting that this was more of an effort to sort of raise up Math 1, and that the Math 1 curriculum is more like the Math 1+ approach. So in support of that, in the announcements that went out this week, it says that we're using that 80 corridor grant that we were in the 3rd year of to provide math tutoring. And so now at the high school on Monday, Tuesdays, and Thursdays for an hour after school, there's going to be a teacher available. So Albany High math teacher is going to be there to help kids with their math, and that's a new thing, and that deserves some applause, because that's a nice step forward. There was one other thing about the math, I think, that I wanted to mention. Oh dear. I'll have to get back to that, but I think there is a lot of ongoing effort in that area. But I do want us to stay on top of that as a board, because I do feel that it's not our role to get into the weeds and to tell people exactly what they're supposed to do, but it is our goal as a board to set a goal and then allow the staff to reach that.
Thank you. Okay, I think we should be moving on now. Do you want to say something real quick?
Sorry, I'll be brief. As the kids say on the street, I know Charles has to bounce by 9, so I'll make this quickly. You suggested the goal about teaching about oppression and so forth, and I'd like to make a more specific suggestion, even though this is a very bird's eye view, that could possibly be a sort of an instrument of blunt force as an education. You might be familiar with the project Implicit Bias conducted by Harvard University. And while the district probably doesn't have the money to invite someone like Dr. Mazarin Bonaggi to give a presentation on it and give training, we actually in the school district have someone who might be able to provide that opportunity.
Rudy.
Rudy, yeah, there you go. So submit it for your consideration. Maybe he might be willing to even volunteer to provide the training for the board, for the staff, and for the the teachers and the students, and then move your goal forward. Thank you.
I think you might. Thank you.
Okay, before we do anything else, I have to make sure that so if the board just give me a couple of seconds here. If I don't hit file save, I think I'm going to get in a lot of trouble. So, Suli, I just hit save, correct? Yes? Okay.
Okay, so.
Is there a way I can minimize this? I'm just so afraid that if I'm going to lose it all if I accidentally didn't save it correctly. It's a lot of information.
All right.
Oh, there we go. Thank you. Okay.
I think we need to extend the meeting at least by 15 minutes. We might get through the rest of this pretty quickly, but I think we're going to need to extend at least till 9:15. Is that okay with everyone?
It's okay with me if you continue the meeting after I leave.
Okay. So let's bring, I think the next item is Board Bylaw 9322.
I also will need to leave at 9, so.
We'll all leave, but the meeting will continue anyway.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay. Board Bylaw 9322.
So just for not that I'm trying to waste time here, but do we have a motion so we can capture this in notes to extend the meeting? Or do we not need it?
I'll make a motion to extend the meeting for 15 minutes.
Okay.
I second.
All right.
Thank you. Okay.
No problem.
So this item is Board Bylaw 9322 for agenda meeting materials, and I was asked to bring this to the board for review. And so I have on the screen here the current board bylaw, and there was the agreement that Paul would take a look at this and make some suggestions, which I've done, and so these are here for your review.
Okay, so basically what we did here was just when we were having our earlier discussion, our offsite, I realized that the board bylaw that should define agenda committee kind of didn't. And the board has been operating without an official agenda committee for as long as I've been on it, and probably a lot longer than that. The vice president has always, as long as I've been on the board, been part of the agenda committee. But the actual board bylaw just said the president and the superintendent create the agenda. So I just updated this board bylaw to conform to what our long-term practice has been. I haven't tried to extend it or make any other changes. So if it looks okay to everybody, if you have any questions, that was my starting point. Charlie?
So I can take it back a little further and testify that the current practice goes back at least as long as I had been on the board since 2004. So I don't quite know why this bylaw
was never updated.
Was at variance with what had been practice.
And it's not impossible that it was updated but never got into gamut. But anyway, as we found it, this is what it said, so I've updated it here.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to note too that Jacob actually flagged that for us at one point, and I appreciate both his catching it and also your rewriting it.
Okay, thanks. So does anyone have any questions or objections or a motion? Oh, actually, it's not an action item.
It's not an action
so the action would be to bring it back on consent at the next meeting if everyone's agreed with it.
The only thing was that there, if the strikeouts were done as indicated, there is a point where you needed the. Which
I've made the change.
You made that change. Yes, then I'm happy to see it back on consent.
Okay, everyone okay with that? Good. All right, that caught us up a little bit.
There we go.
Brings us to a public hearing. So I hereby open public hearing on sufficiency of instructional materials.
Thank you. I'm going to turn this over to Marie Williams, our Director of Curriculum Instruction and Assessment.
Great. Good evening, Superintendent Williams, Board President Black, board members, and community. This is an annual requirement that we conduct a public hearing first and then certify that all students have been provided with sufficient instructional materials for the current school year. So sufficiency speaks to quantities, it does not speak to quality, which I know there have been a lot of questions about that this evening, and I'm happy in the review and action section to respond to some of the questions that have come up. But at this time, it would be appropriate to hear from the public.
Okay, so does anyone want to comment on the sufficiency of instructional materials? In other words, if you know that some kids don't have access to textbooks, then we don't have sufficient instructional materials. As far as I know, we do. Okay. Jacob?
Yeah, I have a quick question. So is online textbooks count as an actual physical book in your hand?
So if a district were to purchase online texts, then yes, those would count for sufficiency. Students would have to be able to access those texts both at home and at school. So sufficiency means that students have adequate materials for youth both at home and at school. It does not mean that they need 2 copies, but that they need to be able to access a copy both at home and at school. So the same would be true for if the materials were provided online.
Do we have any online textbooks?
We have not adopted any materials that are provided predominantly online. We do have many adoptions that have online components, but those wouldn't be considered necessarily for this sufficiency of instructional materials.
So if a student, I hear you're saying it's not required, but I know that there are some, at least portions of classes where they're supposed to access stuff online. And what happens if a student doesn't have the resources to do that? Do we then get them a hard copy, or then do we do something to ensure that they have access to it?
So in that case, we would have to make sure that we provided a hard copy. So for all of our adopted materials, the materials are provided in hard copy. So if let's say there are supplemental components that are accessed online and students don't have access, my sense of it would be that we would need to provide that access to them in hard copy, but I would not want to give a definitive answer without sort of knowing the particulars of a situation. But yeah, we would be required to ensure that kids have the core materials for use both at home and at school, and if there are other pieces that are being used, certainly we would hope that teachers are ensuring that students have access to those supplemental pieces also.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, anyone else? All right, with that I'm going to close the public hearing, and that brings us to the resolution 2018-1906, certifying that we have sufficiency of instructional materials. Do we have any comments or questions on the resolution? Michaela?
Does instruction materials include things like calculators in math classes, or would that solely include textbooks?
Technically textbooks, but in the instance of something like a calculator, students should also have access to those materials if they are required for the coursework.
Mm-hmm. Can I make a comment on that? Thank you. I know that in my math class, I'm in Math 3+, and we were required to get calculators for the course. They weren't provided by the school. There were some, if students weren't able to get calculators, because these calculators, mine was $115. They're extremely expensive, and every student needs one. I think they have some for students who are not able to get them, but then there's, I mean, the whole ordeal of like, it's embarrassing because you have, you know, one of like the bright yellow ones and it's clear that you got it from the school, and then there's like all this kind of like elephant in the room of, oh, your family doesn't have as much money as mine does, or that whole thing happens. And so I'm wondering if there's a way that we would be able to fix that problem, or just bring it to the board's attention as I'm doing right now. And I'm not sure if that's something that would be addressed in this, but I just wanted to acknowledge it.
So that in particular wouldn't be addressed through this resolution, but I would say that if there are materials required for the class, those should be provided to students. So I'm happy to follow up with the principal of the high school regarding that concern that you have raised. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, any other, Ross?
Just to comment on some of the content of this, if you read the board packet, the titles of some of these texts are awesome. And I'm really glad to see The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks there, and give a shout out to Johns Hopkins, which is naming a building after Henrietta Lacks. People's History of the United States, which is a great, less biased take on American history, and Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud, who's a friend, which is a brilliant book about the medium, and I think will encourage an awful lot of students to think about communication and reading and expressing themselves.
Thanks. Anything else? Kim?
Yeah, I also really loved the list of books. But I wanted to ask, because some of these were adopted very recently, and some of these were adopted quite a while back. Can you describe the process for revisiting textbook adoption?
Yeah. So that was a question that came up in the board question. So as far as I am aware, we haven't had a process in place for sort of cycling through adopted materials in order to either be able to replace materials or renew a pilot. But this year we are initiating that process. And so what that will look like this year is working with principals to identify sort of materials and the quality and quantities which we've done here, and then work with principals to set up, okay, this is a cycle then that will be sort of regular and feasible and viable given sort of financial constraints. We do know that right now we are in need of instructional materials for science to align with next generation science standards at the elementary grades. So that will be our next priority, and likely that pilot process will happen in 1920. Our teachers at the elementary level have been very busy implementing and adopting materials for mathematics and also for reading and for writing, and so they asked for some time to implement their current materials before we begin implementing new materials. And then as far as history, social science goes, I know there was a question about that today. While the standards have not changed for history, social science, we do have a new framework, and the new framework really does, I think, try to get at some of the topics that Board Member Weinstein was raising today. And so that would be next on the list of the priorities. I also have been in some communication with our World Language Department, and their books are very old and falling apart, and I was getting that feedback. So in terms of replacement, as we're able to do that, if we're just replacing the text, we can do that as needed. So typically at the end of the year, we'll get information back from sites about sort of that information. But what we want to do is set up a cycle, basically, an adoption cycle that will allow us to cycle back and look at texts. Typically, the life of an adoption is 6 years, and so hopefully we can get on a cycle and have the funds to be able to provide appropriate text to students as content changes and context changes and history is changing.
Thanks. Any other questions, comments? How about a motion?
I move we approve resolution number 2018-1906, Sufficiency of Instructional Materials.
I second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. This brings us to our last action item, approval of the interim English learner reclassification criteria.
I'm going to turn it right over to Marie Williams, please.
Great. So as you know, we have transitioned away from the California English Language Development Test and to a new English learner assessment, the English Language Proficiency Assessments for California, otherwise known as LPAC. And so in this period of transition, CDE has provided guidance to districts that we are able to determine our own local interim English learner reclassification criteria, and that CDE is looking looking in the next couple months to develop some criteria. They're working on thresholds right now to be able to give districts more guidance about reclassification criterion based on the LPAC. So essentially what that means is that students, if they achieved a certain level of performance on the CELT, would be sort of considered automatically eligible for consideration for reclassification. And so that process needs to be conducted also for the LPAC assessment. In the meantime, though, we do have students who are making progress learning English and want to be able to continue to reclassify them. So what I have for you this evening in the packet is our district's proposed LPAC reclassification criteria. This is important right now because we are sending communication to families who have taken the initial LPAC assessment. There are two, one that you take within the first 30 days of entering U.S. schools for the first time, and one that you take every spring. And as a component of the initial notification letter letting families know if they have been identified as English learners, we also have to let them know the reclassification criteria. So we need some criteria to communicate to them. So here is what we are proposing for this year. Do not be surprised if at the end of this year I am bringing you new reclassification criteria based on more guidance from the state of California.
Yeah, can you just go back one page, Val, or up, or however? That's page 75. Right there, thank you. I read the whole thing, but the part where it says details, that's enough for me. District staff and the English language development specialists spend time on this, and I'm satisfied with it, and thank you.
Yeah, and can I just quickly say thank you for mentioning that, Board Member Clark. Our English language development specialists are phenomenal. I wish more people were here this evening to hear me say that. But they worked really hard and really knew the CELT test really very well. And so we're able then to look at some initial results coming out of the LPAC and very confidently make some recommendations about reclassification criteria for this year.
Jacob, can we take that as a motion?
Yes.
Do we have a second?
Sure. No, I'll second that.
All in favor of approving the interim English learner reclassification criteria, say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. That completes the meeting and brings us to agenda items, matters introduced by the board. I have 2 items. Do you have others on the list?
Just that there was information on Tilden Prep that we could do in a staff report, and specifics on special ed. While I think Diane Marie did give some, we could do that as a staff report also.
Okay.
Oh, wait, Paul?
Yes.
I have a little bit of information about the Tilden Prep thing. Of course, as a private business, they have no reason to share their customer base with us. And in terms of getting the getting the grade transferred to satisfy a requirement at the high school, the high school told me that the only time that they would transfer credit would be for 2 years of math credit, which is the requirement. And so if anybody is taking junior or senior courses at Tilden Prep, the high school would not accept those as transfer, and so we cannot sort of dig this out of our own records. What we have is very incomplete, and so I don't know if this is going to be a fruitful search.
But if kids disappear from our classes and later reappear in math classes at the high school, that has to be reconciled somehow. They were there somewhere, they did take math. I'd be interested in hearing this. I mean, this is not for this session, but we can ask staff to sort of dig into those numbers as can be found.
I want to find out where they're taking math. I just don't know how, but
Okay, well, if kids are coming in and saying they want to take Math 3 and they didn't take 1 and 2 at Albany High School, then somebody knows that's happening. I don't know if it is, but we can find that out.
I think at the very least we could do a staff report on what information we can find, and if we can't, the reasons why.
Okay.
We could do it as a staff report.
Okay. Ross?
Yeah, Val, you mentioned holidays in response to Olga's question about holidays and all that. Do you have March 5th as Black American Day on the calendar? Because I think that after graded math tests, that might be the thing I've raised most often on the board. We are required by California Ed Code to observe March 5th as Black American Day. It's the anniversary of the death of Crispus Attucks in the Boston Massacre.
I will check on that.
Thanks. Okay, so I have two items. First, this has come up repeatedly and came up again tonight. Occasionally, we get a contract that has actually already been implemented for late approval because of some reason that we didn't get to see it before it had to start. And we don't, as far as I know, have anything in the handbook or board bylaws saying how to handle that. I think we just need some uniform way. If this can happen, as Diane Murray pointed out earlier, we don't want to have a kid not being educated because the board wasn't in session to approve a contract. But the board also, there should be some notification of some sort. So the board knows this is happening, whether all board members need to know, the agenda committee or whatever, we just should have some protocol. So I'm just suggesting we create one. Jacob?
Yeah, I agree, and I respect what she was saying. You know, of course we don't want them not being educated, but I don't know if it's law or some kind of policy or whatever, but I still have a problem.
Yeah, so we just need a policy that will...
I get it, and I understand why it happens, but we should try to find out a way to make sure it doesn't happen or to advocate in certain circumstances like that. It's just when you really look at the contract, it's an official document, and I'm the one who keeps bringing it up. So yeah. Hopefully we can work on it.
We can put that. The other one is really up to the board. We have had letters and a couple of people coming to the board meeting talking about lane use at the pool. It's not in the board's purview to assign the use of lanes at the pool. But the pool is actually operating under priorities that were set by the board. First priority is that student use, Albany Unified School District student use for a class or a club is the first priority. Second priority is to run in the black. The pool is making these decisions based on that second priority. The board could decide that use by educational groups is a higher priority than operating in the black. The board could make that decision. The difference would be made up from the general fund, but that is a policy decision that the board could decide. I don't know if you want to agendize that or if the current guidelines are okay.
I'm satisfied with the current guidelines.
Does anyone want to put that on the agenda? We don't have to. It's just come up recently, so I thought I'd offer it.
I mean, I've gotten the emails as well. I'm sure you guys might have got additional ones, or I might have gotten some separate ones, but we've all read them. And I had spoke about it last time about having a preference for the Armada to have the extra lane. I hear what you're saying. Maybe it's not our...
The specific lane use is not, but we could...
What you said kind of...
We could say if it's an educational use, it should come before profit. We could
maybe
say...
we should, I think the board should have a talk. Then,
okay,
yeah,
then we can agendize that.
If we think that that's a priority, and then we're okay with picking up the extra, I think it's worth discussing.
Okay.
That's me.
So let's put that on the agenda. Okay. Anyone else have things they want to put on the agenda? Okay, good. Then with that, we are adjourned.